All right. We have organized the chaos. That is automatic behaviors. So I spent some time to get this in a direction and form that I think is all right for now, and then we will work it with Gemini, and maybe we will learn some of this stuff. And then you know what? I do have just notes here that perhaps needs some further queries. Like I asked some questions of like, is this the way that we should be talking about it, or should we go a different route? So I think I'm just going to read through this. This is a potential way of going about this. We have 5 subsections, but I'm a little concerned that we're fitting too much in so few subsections. But anyway, automatic behaviors. So the potential direction, categorize these behaviors by their level of conscious. Okay, we can get rid of this. Actually, we got rid of that. I mean, we conceptually got rid of that as a constraint on how to organize this. This section, automatic behaviors, moves the conversation one layer up, one layer of abstraction up from the biological fuel and the conscious levers that we're seeing in part 2. So this is coming after these guys. So this is kind of getting our hold of how we can deliberately reflect on aspects of our experience as a practical lever of agency, and then we can talk about the underlying conditions that affect this type of reflection, and then we can talk about automatic behaviors, which are what these are driving, what the biological conditions are driving, but also what we can reflect towards. We can specifically expect these things to happen. Like we can get the understanding that these types of behaviors are possible conceptually, but are happening, like literally. Therefore, we can look out for them, and then we can do things that might change them or slow them down in their tracks. So let's read through this. Here we examine the functional architecture of the mind's automatic behaviors, how the neural systems we just explored organize themselves into the persistent, often invisible loops that define our daily reality. So this is all going to be an introduction to this section. Within this introduction, we can consider / introduce all the different ways that we can think about this, and importantly, how these usually intuitively manifest for us in our experience. So intuitive ways in which these manifest for us, we got like pre-attentive processes, so sensory filtering, where you automatically hear your name in a crowded room. We got innate instincts, fixed action patterns, and that are evolutionarily hardwired. We got overlearned skills, behaviors that were once conscious but became muscle memory. So these are internalized. Habitual loops of all kinds, the cue, routine, and reward cycle that governs lifestyle behaviors. The social dynamics, I don't know if we want to say neurobiology, we could just say social dynamics. And we will cover social dynamics for sure in this section. The metaphor, referencing Lisa Feldman Barrett's discussion of metaphors of the brain in 7.5 lessons about the brain. Of the dual process theory, contrasting system 1 with system 2. Once again, grounding this in the interpreter module, the brain automatically weaves a story to explain our automatic actions after they've already happened. If we don't realize our reasons for acting are often post hoc stories, we can't accurately audit our habits. So this is huge. And then we could talk about the evolutionary why of this automaticity. We could always look to homeostasis, allostasis, autopoiesis to provide a first pass. While metabolic efficiency is a massive selection pressure, it isn't the whole story. So we want to be careful that we don't over-explain using this idea of homeostasis. We got the problem of combinatorial explosion. Without automaticity, a system would be paralyzed by choice. If every muscle fiber contraction or sensory filter required a top-down decision, the executive would be buried under a mountain of micro decisions. Automaticity isn't just about saving energy, it is a functional necessity for real-time agency. We got automaticity as exaptation, so as opposed to just adaptations. Many automatic behaviors we see today likely started as adaptations for survival, physical survival, for example, the startle reflex, but have been co-opted for social survival. For example, our automatic tendency to mimic the posture of someone we like is an exaptation of the mirror neuron system, originally for learning motor skills, now used for social signaling and cohesion. We got the byproduct view. We can look at these as spandrels. Some automaticity is likely a byproduct of how neural architecture is wired. If you have a highly interconnected brain optimized for pattern recognition, for example, to find food, an automatic byproduct is that you will also see patterns in random noise. So superstition, epiphania. Was that what we talked about yesterday? Was this, not yesterday, maybe 2 days ago, the thing with faces? Or was that a different... No, okay, this is the one about faces was should be in this type of discussion as well. The fact that we might see like faces where there's no faces to be seen, like on toast. It's not efficient to be superstitious. It's a tax we pay for having a pattern matching brain. So then we could talk about the mechanics of autopilot. So this is the underlying what's going on. This would be slightly more in the weeds in terms of neural processes. This subsection establishes the baseline of how any behavior becomes automatic. It bridges the biological fuel, which is what we would have discussed in biological conditions, with the functional software, loops. So this idea of loops is not something that we would have actually gotten here yet. We've got all the building blocks of loops, and now we can actually point out what those create. So the general theme would be automaticity is older than consciousness. These signals often have shortcuts that affect behavior before they affect thought. And the thoughts they affect might be more complicated / unintuitive than thinking about them as merely sense data showing up in consciousness. That second part's huge because we often think of these underlying processes as simple or... you know, just this sensory stimuli affects this thing in this way, and it's, you know, we have to realize these are really complex. A lot of these processes are happening without us knowing at all about them, and we can only try to figure out what biases we are dealt with, which biases we have to deal with now. All right, the basal ganglia and energy conservation. Automation is a functional necessity to avoid combinatorial explosion, the paralysis of having to consciously decide every micro movement and sensory filter. I don't know if we want to say this because, once again, this automation is a feature that came along much long before consciousness even showed up. So I wouldn't want to use this type of way of describing it to avoid yeah, I'm gonna just keep it like that, even though that's still a little sus. We need to make clear how evolutionarily old this mechanism is. Of course, it's all still embedded in homeostasis / allostasis. It's certainly a pre-human consciousness feature. It effectively takes over repetitive tasks to save metabolic energy. Make sure to ground this in neuroplasticity, which the reader should be quite familiar with at this point. We will talk about neuroplasticity within biological conditions, but we've also discussed it thoroughly in part 1, and we will probably mention it as well in these early sections. The reflexive spectrum from spinal reflex arcs to homeostatic regulators, shivering, blinking, managed by the autonomic nervous system, heart rate variability, pupil dilation. These are the most rigid programs affecting our baseline arousal, norepinephrine and acetylcholine. Norepinephrine being what's affecting, like, you can imagine the magnitude of your arousal, and then acetylcholine is like the focus, the spotlight of your attention. Before we even see the world, before we even consciously see the world. Important that we reference back to the biological conditions section. Refer back. Understanding behaviors that never reach the brain at all, so spinal cord responses. These homeostatic regulators are involuntary behaviors driven by the autonomic nervous system, so shivering, blinking, heart rate variability. The reader will have a surface level understanding of the global neuronal workspace theory at this point. So it's important to point out how many of these stimulus response mechanisms bypass conscious experience via shortcuts that are significantly shorter than responses via ignition conscious relay. While we could say that many of these stimulus response systems bypass the prefrontal cortex entirely, I imagine that many of these signals do still compete for ignition, potentially reaching conscious awareness only much longer after having an initial effect. All right, we got the adjudication marketplace here, how the ventromedial prefrontal cortex uses dopamine as a common currency to weigh competing drives and decide which behavior wins the bid for the moment. So we will have the mechanism behind this type of dopamine-driven inhibition from biological conditions. Dopamine acts as the utility metric when drives compete, for example, the drive to rest versus the drive to seek food. The brain's ventromedial prefrontal cortex weighs the expected value of each and decides, quote-unquote decides, based on the highest immediate or predicted neurochemical payoff. Then we got conflict monitoring. The anterior cingulate cortex flags mismatches between goals and impulses, triggering the executive system to intervene. We need to consider what this intervention looks like, how much of it is simply inhibition versus excitation or some other mechanisms. And then we've got inhibition failure. Study prepotent responses. These are automatic behaviors so dominant they require active, metabolically expensive suppression to stop. All right, then we've got innate survival. And so this is going to be our next subsection. Innate survival and social heuristics. Now we add the human nature layer. We explain that the adjudication in subsection 1 isn't happening in a vacuum. It's heavily weighted by evolutionary survival scripts. So this is where we're kind of starting more evolutionary, and we're going to go into more dynamic cultural. Yo, Energy Doctor, what's good? I have a question related to your views on an economic theory, if that's okay with me. I don't know if I'm going to spend too much time with an economic theory. I really don't care too much about economic theories, but you could try. And I do want to know why you're curious what my views are on this. I wonder if, you know, perhaps you're just interested in my opinion on different things, but I'm just curious why it's relevant. All right, negative bias and loss aversion. The brain is hypervigilant toward threats and losses because ignoring a threat was historically more fatal than ignoring a gain. So we're starting off with some of the biases that we can point out here. The tricky thing is to talk about some of these biases here and some of them in the next subsection, but we'll figure that one out. Innate sociality. Humans are obligatory gregarious. The brain automatically prioritizes status and belonging because, for an ancestor, exclusion meant death. So our perception of value, threat, and truth is fundamentally affected by the need for belonging. That's something we want to mention over and over and over again within parts 1, 2, and 3. Thank you. Okay, I appreciate the compliment here. I respect your ideas generally. You're a smart person. Thank you very much. All right. Well, given the compliment, I can entertain a. But I don't know if I'm going to spend much time on it. I'll definitely give it the old, the surface level summary, but. All right, affordance-based automaticity, the body schema. As per embodied cognition, our brain automatically maps the world in terms of what we can do with it. For example, seeing a chair is sittable. So we have to realize that we're experiencing these affordances rather than just like static facts. and this connects obviously with all the stuff we talked in part one, how you could always think about facts in the normative sense. What it would mean for that to be true. What it would mean for you to do for that to be true. So, all right, what's your perspective on Bohm Bulwark's argument that entrepreneurs are entitled to their profit because they satisfy the intertemporal time preference of their employees to wages? What is going on here? I don't think I'm going to have too much of a say here. This is I mean, this seems pretty out there. I'm not in this realm, and also I would say that none of these arguments are like right, but maybe they're more or less compelling. So I'm going to see how compelling this is. Addresses the problem of profit and interest by looking at the dimension of time. His argument serves as a direct rebuttal to Marx's labor theory of value, which posited that profit is merely surplus value stolen from workers. The defense of entrepreneurial profit rests on the concept of time preference, the universal human tendency to value present goods more highly than the same goods in the future. So it's grounding itself in a bias, in a cognitive bias here. Now I'm curious how effective that is to ground your theory in just a single cognitive bias. You could have a lot of fun doing that, right? You can probably abuse that type of system. You just find you could find a confirmation bias, and then you could say because of the confirmation bias, therefore, like humans tend to value goods that, first of all, humans tend to value goods that they work on, by the way. So, perhaps it's less expensive, but because they've, worked on it, then they feel like it's more expensive than it should be. So that's a bias. You could probably, start with that and run in a direction. All right, the conflict of time horizons. In any production process, there is a gap between the start of work and the sale of the final product. Okay. The product is a future good. What's the point here? Argued that workers are typically unwilling or unable to wait months or years for the full value of their label to be realized at the point of sale. Okay, fine. The entrepreneur as a time merchant. The entrepreneur performs a specific service. They bridge the temporal gap. They exchange present goods, wages paid now, for future goods. The products. Okay, that's fine. Workers receive a guaranteed immediate sum. They're effectively trading the uncertain value. I mean, that's the thing. It's like, this is fine. It's just a way of conceptualizing things. And at the end of the day, we don't operate on people's... Actually, we kind of do operate on it, but we don't need to operate on people's stringent conceptualizations. Like, this is the whole idea that we get to, like, especially in a democracy or in any type of system where, we're actually taking in preference. We could take in preference about the very interpretation of what's happening. So we could say that if workers end up not being happy with whatever this theory tells them they should be happy with, then why do we just like hold this theory to be more valuable or more authoritative than what people want? That's the whole idea. What we actually we kind of look for some sort of preference, a system that takes into account people's preferences. Why profit is justified. Right, so this is a way to justify the profit, but if all the people are not happy about this way of interpreting what's going on, then who has final say as to whether or not it's good in some fundamental sense? This is just a logical, and when I say logical, I don't mean like logical in the sense that it's right, like it's a it's not reasonable in the sense that it is like something that smart people arrive at. It's just something that has been justified via reasons, and then you could determine whether or not those reasons are compelling or not compelling or good or bad. But I would not be compelled by those reasons because I would prefer to hear the preferences of the workers. I think that would be more I don't know, more fair maybe to them. It also perhaps leads to a system where the workers could get exploited because they don't have any power or influence in the wages. So, that's another thing. Like, people would prefer their wages to be larger. People would prefer the what's the lowest wages called? They would prefer that to be larger. Minimum wage? There it is. Okay, Onion Helmet, what's good? One of the greatest tragedies of the modern age, thinking economics is a science like physics. I feel that in the sense of what we just talked about, but then there's also like ways in which you can look at economics. I feel like through a much more scientific lens where you're like seeing patterns, and that in my mind is as scientific as physics. Homo economicus does not exist. Humans are rational, self-interested agents. Wrong. True. Bulwark's mistake here is thinking he can use logic to persuade someone. I mean, I imagine he persuaded a lot of people, especially people who have interest in that type of outcome. So we'll get to that. But so far, we've just got negative bias and loss aversion. We got innate sociality. Our perception of value, threat, and truth is fundamentally affected by the need for belonging. We got affordance-based automaticity, the body schema. As per embodied cognition, our brain... So did I just say this twice now? Where did I put this last? Over here? Or did I just say it once? Am I going crazy? Did I really only say this once and I just forgot that I said it that recently? Wow, I did. Okay. Yikes. The affect heuristic. Intuition is often system one pattern matching that uses a gut feeling affect as a proxy for risk calculation. So I say system one is fundamentally yet subtly grounded in system two. This is a topic we will discuss more thoroughly later in the document as it relates to our rational thought. There we go. Making decisions based on an immediate emotional response. I feel bad about this, therefore it is wrong, rather than a calculation of risk. A lot of times we do that. It's like our fundamental mode, unless we actually put in the effort to make, to exert that energy to think. And thinking is not our like base mode. That's I should make that case. Thinking is not our base mode of reacting to the world. Okay. Somatic marker hypothesis proposed by Antonio Damasio. Woo! It suggests that gut feelings are actually the brain replaying physical sensations from past experiences to guide current behavior. So that all falls under the affect heuristic. That isn't really persuasion then, is it? Oh, what did I say? That it does compel some people but not others? I own a huge factor. I think Bulwark is right. Oh, I see. It's not... Well, it depends. That's all persuasion is at the end of the day. The people that you usually persuade are persuaded because of how eager they are to be persuaded. Like looking back to the discussion we had yesterday about Daryl Davis. He made it so that people were easier to persuade. He didn't get a better argument. He just set up. He changed the table, or All right. I don't fully agree with your skepticism to the argument because it's logical in my view that if a worker agrees guaranteed payment earlier rather than an unguaranteed payment, even if it's more money later than them. I mean, it is. I mean, that is logical. That's not what I'm. Or that's what I did say. It does feel logical. It sounds logical, but it doesn't take into account like a ton of counter arguments that people could come up with, such as I mentioned, that people would prefer larger wages, and perhaps they are forced into the position where they have to accept the wages that are given to them because the only alternate path is to starve and die. So, they would prefer the wages to be larger. They would think that the outcome would be would render like the amount of time they're putting in to be more valuable than what they're being paid for, but they're being the reason why you would say it's like extorted is because they have no other option. They have to work at those wages. So that's like one of the many counter arguments I imagine you can make for this. But once again, just because things sound logical doesn't mean that they're like good or right. That's kind of, it's going to be my main deal. Like, I would rather that everyone thought it was logical, right? So regardless of whether or not, what I just said, that counter argument, put that counter argument aside, I want to make sure that everyone in this situation thinks that that argument is logical. I think it matters to me whether or not everyone agrees upon the logic of the system. And if, let's just say, all the people who are working at the wages are saying, hey, I don't think the system's logical, but the entrepreneur thinks it is, then I would say, okay, maybe there's something wrong with the system, not because of any like specific reason, but because we would prefer a system where everyone thought it was reasonable. And like the hedge, or not the hedge, the bet there is that perhaps I'm missing something about the argument. Like perhaps I don't know a counter argument, but these people might. There's so many people that don't think that this is logical that I'm probably missing something. That's the way I would go about it. Like I think we have to think about social relationships or social structures through some sort of preference. It's not like, I don't want to say utilitarianism because that's really reductive, but it has to be some sort of preference aggregation. We need to take into account everyone's preference in some sense. And perhaps, perhaps this is just coming from my own pre-biases about morality, of that each person has a preference that matters. But, the argument that I would make and potentially will make in the epilogue of part 3 is that given that each person has this circumstance of consciousness that, they are affected by all these things. So I don't know. I'd have to make an argument that their preferences were, worthy of listening to. I don't know. I don't know how to do that yet. But it also might just be an argument that just sounds reasonable and isn't, necessarily right. And that's kind of the point. We have to exist in that humility. But preferences are not the same as facts induced through experience or deduced from axioms. When we're talking about complex meaning, let's just say, so meaning that's very far away from simple empirical meaning. And I know that this is such a gray area. Like what is really simple empirical meaning versus I guess just humor me on the idea that there are things that are more complex that different people might infer different things or might interpret what's happening in different ways. It's very difficult to separate facts from preferences. So whatever you think you're feeling when you read out that argument, when you think about that argument, and you feel like it's logical because you think it comprehensively captures the argument, I'm arguing that is a manifestation of your preference in some sense. Not that you prefer the outcome, but I'm just saying, like, this is like your opinion. So when I say preferences, I don't just mean like what, concrete things people want. I mean their opinions as well. And yeah, so preferences are not the same things as facts induced through experience. So that's a nice word here. Induction rather than deduction. Like there's some sort of inductive aspect of these things. These things are, these interpretations are novel perspectives by people through experience are deduced from axioms. Now, the deduced from axioms, I almost want to always say that we can't think about deduction here, because we must always keep in mind that there could be counter arguments that makes our argument not deductive anymore. And that's an argument that just shuts off any type of deductive argument in that sense. I don't think arguments are deductive. Now, obviously, we set up systems in which there is deductive operations, such as like math. But when we're having these types of arguments and, these types of theories, like, these aren't deductive theories. They might feel deductive, they might sound deductive, but don't fool yourself into thinking they're deductive. Okay. My favorite thing about economics is how every economic school of thought thinks that their worldviews are scientific. Marx famously thought that his dialectical materialism was a science and tried to present it as such. Right, yeah. We have to hold this standard for anyone. Yo, Birdbanes, what's good? Good morning. How is tomorrow? Should I be excited when I wake up in the morning, or should I spend the 5 extra minutes in bed? Isn't it February 5th for you? All right, then we've got implicit social categorization. Subconscious categorization, in-group, out-group, occurs within milliseconds, affecting the valuation, the ventromedial prefrontal cortex, assigns to social interactions. This probably extends to all interactions, as our commitments to semantic facts have normative implications towards the group. So this is something we cannot forget. Just because it's really noticeable when we're talking about unconscious biases in like social encounters, like those same biases are affecting us when we're dealing with just things that we think are semantic facts. There's always some implication as to what it would mean for you to take that thing to be true. And that goes back to part 1. Man, part 1 was so fun, and now we spent all this time on, I guess consciousness is still part 1, but the part 1 philosophy was so fun, and we've spent so much time in neuroscience. Bed is always a safe choice. Yeah, fair enough, especially after this past week. All right, discusses mimetic desire, valuing what others value, and in-group, out-group biases is affecting what we even consider worth attending to. We got identity protective cognition. When a belief is tied to your identity, your brain treats an attack on that belief as a physical threat, triggering an automatic fight or flight response during a debate. How we automatically defend our self-concept as if it were a physical limb. Right, and so sometimes that the implications of taking something to be true would be an assault to our own self-concept, and that's something we need to keep in mind. We need to be aware of it. We got to look out for it. We can think about identity as agentic rather than merely static properties. So the agency dopamine loop. The feeling of having agency actually releases more dopamine, making the way easier. Success is neurochemically enabling. So while this is something that we can use, like we could leverage in some positive sense, like where we can use it to keep momentum, we have to keep in mind that this is actually also a bias that could hinder us. So our experience will easily align with the way, while obstacles will be either less noticeable or difficult to acknowledge. So this is like a bias in itself. If there's something that, some fact is now hindering your ability to keep going, then that might be pretty jarring. All right, overall, our intuition is often just highly efficient pattern matching that bypasses logic, which is just something we use to conceptualize, spending more time to run through more complicated internalized loops of thought to protect us. This leads us to further identifying, discussing these systematic biases. Okay, systematic biases. And I ask, is there too much for this subsection? We will see. Building on the evolutionary priors, this subsection addresses the universal shortcuts that affect all human decision making. We bridge the gap between noticing a behavior at the psychological level and the underlying complexity. I say it's crucially important to note that these aren't necessarily errors. Many of these helped our ancestors out immensely, and many still do help us out immensely. However, now that we have such a grasp on empirical science, we can see how these are merely heuristics and consider whether each is leading us in the direction that we want to go in. This leads to a discussion of expectable and noticeable cognitive biases. An automatic bias, like an in-group bias, isn't necessarily a thought you have. It is a prior that makes it physically easier for your brain to process information that fits the bias and harder to process information that doesn't. These automatic mechanisms act as volume knobs on incoming data. If you have an automatic fear response to a certain stimulus, that bottom-up signal is given so much weight that the top-down executive signal, for example, I am safe, cannot overcome it. And that might be a panic attack. All right, we got confirmation bias and predictability. The brain filters reality to match existing beliefs because restructuring a worldview is more metabolically expensive than ignoring evidence. An automatic defensive mechanism where being presented with contradictory evidence actually strengthens a person's original belief. Crazy. And then I say we need to connect this fundamentally to predictive processing. We start with priors, and new information is deemed salient based on its magnitude, arousal, of error, positive or negative. It's important to highlight the positive and negative emotions that can come from this. Noticeably, vindication feels good and contradiction feels bad. We need to direct the reader to consider how this operates at the unnoticeable scale. This is fundamental and pervasive. We are always already biased by our priors. Oh, okay. Sexual rivalry, someone being suddenly desirable once someone else finds them attractive and is in active pursuit. So that is a really interesting bias, but I don't think that helps us in identifying and pursuing our goals, unless, of course, that is the goal. But yeah, I don't think that would be a necessary bias to talk about in this context, even though it is super interesting. Like, it is perhaps just an art, or like just another point to make of how affected our brain is by these evolutionary impulses, evolutionary circuits. Type of resource hoarding. Whoa. Was that specific to the last thing you said, or is that a different bias that perhaps we should consider? Take an anti-vaxxer. It's probable that they are untrusting of authority and have a high opinion of their intelligence and experience. How do you change their mind? You don't. You'll only learn if their children get measles or something akin, or if they have some positive emotional experience, authority figure, or institution. Cue atheist in the Sistine Chapel. Right, I think it really matters what your information diet is. It really, really matters what your information diet is. So you could convince that person otherwise if you were to expose them to people that they would find respectable in some sense, or someone that wins them over as respectable, and then has that opinion. Then it makes it easier for them to get to that opinion. So it's all about social groups, information bias, etc. It's so important. One of the reasons I support school choice is because our ideas... What is school choice? Is because our ideas are often influenced by our priors. I believe education, which accommodates the student's creativity, allows for error correction if the student's priors are faulty, since the student can find out for themselves if they're wrong through experimentation. So this is choosing which school you go to? I mean, I obviously, I agree about education. I'm curious where school choice comes into play. Ideas are often influenced by priors. I believe education, which accommodates the student's creativity. Okay, so you're saying education accommodating the student's type of learning or creativity allows for error correction if the student's priors are faulty. So, okay, they're trying a different school out and they're seeing if it's actually the one that fits. It gives them that type of learning experience. I agree. I think that's nice. I was able to, I guess I really didn't have a choice over my middle school. I think my parents just kind of found one that was good. But high school I had a choice on, and I later deemed it was the right decision. It was a good decision. And I'm very happy about my high school experience. And then for college, I did the what's it called when you I did an early decision to a place, and I backed out of that, which you're not supposed to do. And after the fact, I can say that that was the right decision as well. I've just been getting lucky over and over. But chances are it's just because I'm optimistic, and I probably would have, if I didn't make that decision, I probably would have enjoyed the other place. But knowing what I know now, I would argue that I probably wouldn't enjoy it. I wouldn't have enjoyed it as much. All right. The next one is the availability heuristic. We estimate probability based on ease of recall, which stacks the deck for the neuroeconomic adjudicator in the ventromedial prefrontal cortex. Similar to confirmation bias, in that it's easy to intuit this through the model of predictive processing. Right, if your priors are already, literally biased in a sense, then it's going to be easier to see that. It's going to be easier to see those affordances too. So we can talk about that as well. Given that we interact with affordances, this is why these biases affect what we believe to be possible to do, which leads to possibility of what is. That's the whole. So a lot of this is part one stuff. I don't know how much we want to make like these part one-isms in this section, but I think it would be useful to do that. I think that's what we earned through part one. This is what allows us to mistakenly see things that aren't there, right? We talked about that. Going back to the Darmadam's mirror. Overestimating the importance of information that comes easily to mind. For example, being afraid of sharks because you just saw a movie about them. Or you just saw a horror movie, so now you're freaking out in your room. All right, probability / risk biases. So this is where I don't know how we're supposed to organize this all into a subsection, but we got probability risk biases. We got availability heuristic, which we just talked about. We got the optimism bias. We got negativity bias. We got decision-making biases. We need to make it clear that decision-making is more fundamental than merely making noticeable decisions. Following our discussion of the affect heuristic, these are the biases that fundamentally affect how we experience the world, as we are in some sense, calling back to part one, constantly, unconsciously making decisions about how the world ought to be. Okay. Anchoring, decoy effect, loss aversion, the tendency to prioritize avoiding losses over acquiring equivalent gains, an evolutionary survival strategy that can paralyze modern decision making. Okay, loss aversion's huge. Social memory biases, social/memory biases. The fudge factor in interpreter module. This is so important that we should mention it again. The fudge factor. Oh, this is the one where we can always kind of come up with a justification for what just happened. A figure included in calculation to account for error or unanticipated circumstances. So if I were to do bias here, I think we'll get it closer. Is an arbitrary, often subconscious adjustment made to data, budgets, or time estimates to align results with desired outcomes or to account for uncertainty. So I would just say that this is us. This is copium. This is copium. That's what that is. Copium. Is that not how I would say copium? I think that's how I would say copium. And the interpreter module, the fact that we end up interpreting what's going on after the fact. How do I say this? So like you experience all these things, you see all these things, and then you kind of interpret what makes sense of that. It's not that these things actually happened in some like absolute sense. It's that you're literally in this position where you have to interpret what's going on, and you can then can lead you to coping, making up something that feels right, even though obviously in that moment you're affected by all these biases that we just mentioned. So margin of error, fudge factor. Out of curiosity, if your document discusses probability theory, what interpretation of probability does it believe in? For example, frequentism, Bayesianism, propensity interpretation, etc. I don't know, probably the one that's most... I actually have no idea. I haven't looked at this space, but I would say like whatever is intuitive for an individual, right? Like we're not looking at probability theory as it relates to making sense of macroeconomics. We're looking at probability theory just in relation to how people can make sense of the events that are happening for them. So I think at least Bayes is going to be important, but I don't know what those other ones talk about. This reminds me of that one quote, the U.S. is not a democracy, it's a constitutional republic. I don't even know what that means. I don't know my civics well enough, unfortunately, even though I probably should. All right, we got hindsight bias. We got egocentric bias. So these are all biases related to making sense of things after the fact or remembering things. Affective forecasting and the hot-cold empathy gap. We are remarkably bad at predicting how our future automatic selves will feel or act. This explains why we set goals while cold, calm, logical, that we fail to keep when we are hot, hungry, stressed, or tired. Pluralistic ignorance and automatic social feedback loop where everyone privately disagrees with a norm but publicly follows it because they wrongly assume everyone else supports it. So this is more like social biases. We could put this as a separate social biases, memory biases. Obviously these are all still social and these are still memory, but we can kind of try to disconnect them in some sense. All right, then we got personal context, and I say this is way too large of a topic for one subsection. This is where we transition from the universal human to the individual agent. We connect personal history, memory, to the mechanisms discussed in subsection 1. So the point being is like these memory biases are going to affect everyone regardless of what they remember. These probability risk stuff, like confirmation bias is affecting anyone regardless of what they know. Obviously what they know is affecting how the bias manifests itself, but those are separate. But now we're looking at personal context stuff. So a theme here must be that these personal habits are fundamentally affecting the brain, affecting experience and behavior. While it's common to think about everyone dealing with the same type of experience, which leads people to fail to empathize with others, we must acknowledge how significant these changes are. So this is where we get to talk about habits. The specific cue, routine, reward cycles that govern personal lifestyles, such as emotional... that govern all habit. We don't want to just do this personal lifestyle stuff. Overlearned skills and individual scripts, how conscious effort eventually compiles into subcortical muscle memory or narrative scripts. Right, okay, we got to talk about addictions here. We need to thoroughly discuss how addictions can form and that it's affecting significant structural changes in the brain. We got to talk about negative emotion, thought loops. We got to talk about thinking in general. While depression and anxiety have more complex physiological and neurochemical causes, we can still discuss the types of habitual patterns that increase the chances or severity of these negative emotions. We can talk about interpretive habits. Unlike universal biases, these are personal narrative scripts, such as a habit of thinking the world is holistic or hostile, that are conditioned by personal context and social environment. While everyone has confirmation bias, what they're confirming is a personal habit of thought. For example, the world is hostile versus I am capable. Memory as weighting mechanism. Personal experiences and trauma are stored as somatic markers that bias. Okay, so we just have to connect those back. Identity, protective, cognition. When a belief is tied to identity, the brain treats contradiction as a physical threat. So we already talked about that, but we could run that back in. And then epistemological humility. Acknowledging that our thoughts are conditioned scripts rather than direct reflections of absolute truth is the first step towards reclaiming agency. And then obviously we want to spend a lot of time on strategies of intervention. So how do we break habits? How do we break addictions? Finally, we provide specific tools. While much of this section has been pointing out the identifiable heuristics that we can look out for using... What am I saying here? While much of this section has been pointing out the identifiable heuristics that we can look out for using these tools. I see. So here are the tools that we could use now to identify and affect all the stuff we just talked about. And we show how to use conscious attention from the previous section to intervene in the loops established in subsection 1. So main theme, we cannot erase old neural pathways. We can build stronger competing ones in the sense that these will literally compete for the neural space and ultimately overwrite the previous ones through deliberate repetition and environmental design. Because neural pathways for old habits remain physically present, the goal of the agent is to build stronger competing pathways through deliberate repetition and environmental design. All right, basically the same thing, just said twice. Mindfulness is a circuit breaker, using focus to notice the anterior cingulate cortex prediction error signal before a habit fires. As we discussed in the previous section, we can build these very skills of mindfulness to help us out with all of our deliberate intervention of automatic behaviors. That's kind of the value of mindfulness training. You get to use it for all of the biases that I just mentioned. Mindfulness training helps you better focus it on these as they happen. And it also obviously helps you appreciate how much of your thinking is not up to you, how automatic it really is. Okay, I should say that. And of course, it shows how much our automatic thinking is really not up to us. Like even after we put in significant effort. Okay. It's like all of these biases in one. It doesn't even make sense. Well, which one are we talking about? Which one doesn't make sense? So to clarify, are you saying your document believes in multiple interpretations of probability? I have no idea. I'm not sure. I don't know what that means. Are these interpretations of probability like mutually exclusive? Like, do I have to choose one? Or I don't know enough about them to to make a claim about probability. Probability models. All right, implementation intentions. Pre-programming if-then scripts to hijack the brain's natural automation architecture. So if I feel stress, then I will take 3 breaths. If I notice this type of urge, then I will leave, right? Like if I notice the urge to, I don't know, go to the bar? No. Go on my phone, eat something. Maybe I go for a walk. You could set those things up so you're able to, you got a heuristic in mind, and then you do something if you feel that heuristic. And then we also have to talk about the importance of go and no-go for neuroplasticity. Each is crucial for directing the trajectory of our automatic behavior. So while go is really important, so go would involve doing something, like specifically getting yourself to do something. No-go would be leveraging your concentration and your effort to not do something when whatever drive appears, and that is really effective for building a stronger connection in the brain that could inhibit or overwrite the previous connections you had. Meditation's kind of interesting because I feel like it's go and no go. Like you're doing something, but you're also not entertaining thoughts. Like that's kind of the point. So it's somewhat no go in that you're not going to entertain these drives that are going to try to push you into thinking about things. But then you are going in the sense that you leverage some sort of prompt of like, okay, I'm going to focus on my breath, or I'm going to notice this thing and I'm going to do this other thing. So you kind of got that agency in there too. To my understanding, they're mutually exclusive interpretation. Oh, okay. So then I don't know yet. We'll have to look at that. The quote. Oh, it's like all the biases in one. It doesn't. Okay, I see. I mean, I can't. I just don't know enough to make sense of it. Yo, Daniel N. Stanislayer the Manslayer. Am I Stan Slayer? I added the I in there because there's so many of them. Have I been slaying men over here? I would recommend, if you believe probability theory is relevant for the document, researching the different interpretations of probability. I guess we'll get there. I don't know if it really is gonna matter. I mean, I'm speculating, but I don't know if it's gonna matter if we like choose one of these things for our view, our practical view, our individual perspective here. What do you think is different about people who see a fact contrary to their already held view and change their mind immediately? Do they have giganeuroglutamatation going on? What's going on? I think it's just that they have. I mean, it's hard to tell like what is physically different in the brain, so we can only like interpret it. And it would be something like they have part of their identity is including the possibility that they could do that, right? The possibility that they could see a fact that could change their mind. So they're open to change in some way. That's what I would say. So where did that identity come from? Maybe it's their culture. Maybe it's something they've developed themselves. Maybe it's a sort of confidence in yourself, not needing to be right all the time. Like it could be some sort of anti-ego thing that they built up. Yo, Darmanon, what's good? Hey gang, we are good. So yeah, that's what I would say is that like that's the only difference. It's not that there's like more activate I don't think we should get in this habit of thinking like more activation or bigger brain or anything. It's just whatever structures have been built in their brain via past conditioning, and that past conditioning allowed them to be predisposed to that fact in such a way that it could actually change their minds. And we can only speculate as to what leads you to doing that. And perhaps we will find specific methods for keeping yourself open in that regard. So there's a lot of philosophies that do kind of hold that type of uncertainty about facts. So, that's kind of implicit in everything we say on this channel. Like, be open to the possibility that you are wrong. And so when you see a fact, we actually go farther. We say, like, notice the feeling that you experience when you notice a fact that is contrary to what you think is right or what you thought was right. So, like, literally just be mindful of that, how physiological that experience is. I got a copy of Buddha's Brain. What does that mean? Seems kind of surface level so far, though. Oh, is Buddha's Brain a book? The book you were talking about. Oh. Oh, okay. Seems kind of surface level. All right. Well, that might be fine. I go maybe a little too deep in some of these other books. Maybe we should get a surface level book that I could cruise through. Okay, think it depends on how the view is internally categorized. Suddenly discovering pineapple on pizza tastes fantastic versus flat earthers letting go of long held belief that shakes their core. Right? Yeah. It all matters also like how ingrained the previous belief was, how Yeah, what are the ramifications? How close is that identity to your social identity? And when I say that, I don't mean just like your like if you were to think about it, how logically close it is. I mean like how deeply internalized it is in that regard. Pineapple on pizza is more of an opinion than the whatever the flat earthers are getting up to. Yeah, that being said, a lot of people believe that pineapple on pizza being bad is like a fact about the world, and they act that way. And I think that even though it's fun and funny in that context, I still think it's not a good practice, and uh, we should not let ourselves exercise that type of thinking. All right, losing faith in one's taste buds can be a deeply shocking experience. Some would say your liking of pineapple and pizza taste is a subjective fact, not a belief. Ah. Now, couldn't we just say it's a subjective fact that you believe that the earth is flat? I have the biggest sword. Okay. Facts don't care about your pizza. By the way, if anyone hasn't played Pineapple on Pizza, I would highly recommend. And don't look up anything about it. It only takes like an hour tops. I think it's like a 20-minute game, honestly. It might even be less than that. It might be like a 5-minute game. I forget, but this is a phenomenal game. Oh my gosh, we got the view. How are they getting past? Is there new like viewers? Just trying to bring up examples. Absolutely. No, these are good examples. Yeah, like the tricky thing is like people's tastes, like whether or not you like something, is affected by your priors. So if you know that your social group thinks that people who like pineapple on pizza are lame and you were to eat pineapple on pizza, you would be more likely to not like it than if your social group was fine with pineapple on pizza. So there's like a really weird gray area between what opinions are and what are like non opinions, I guess. Sword, right? Oh, biggest word equals pineapple and pizza is wrong, right, depending on what the person wielding the sword says. I see. That you hold the belief any would be a subjective fact, but that doesn't make the belief itself subjectively factual, I take it. Yeah, I guess what is the category of subjective factuality then? I've seen Onion Sword on multiple occasions and it's massive. Nice. Therefore, yeah. What's your take then, Onion Helmet? Is pineapple on pizza good or bad? If you've got the biggest sword, you should learn Pali classes from Dom in the Discord every Tuesday. Oh, that would be lit. I've thought about learning Sanskrit, but I'm not really a language dude. Did not expect pineapples to be such a dividing topic. Yep, it's always funny when something random creates a deep dive. I mean, I guess that wasn't a really deep dive, but we could go into a deep dive on pineapples. All right, where were we here though? Okay, metacognitive labeling, using the interpreter module to name a drive, which shifts the behavior from a subcortical routine back to the prefrontal cortex for review. So, all that to say, like, For example, I am experiencing a dopamine craving instead of I want that. So you can label what's going on in a more mindful way where you are making explicit some like interpretation of what's happening that might make it so that you feel a certain way about it. So instead of I am experiencing a dopamine craving, it is my brain wants me to do something that I don't want to do, even though you want that under the hood. It might be less likely that you actually do it. All right, the shift and persist strategy, a specific tool for dealing with automatic stress responses, reappraising stressors as challenges rather than threats to prevent physiological inflammation, right? And there's so many of these types of labelings that we're going to talk about within this part 2. Just framing in general, framing what you're experiencing has a huge effect on your experience and on your ability to navigate the space that you've set up for yourself. Choice architecture, designing the environment to add friction to bad habits and flow to goal-aligned ones, making intentionality the path of least resistance. Since overriding the autopilot is metabolically expensive, it is nearly impossible when the body budget is in deficit. Interventions must focus on environmental design, making desired behaviors the path of least resistance. How environmental design, choice architecture, makes automatic behaviors harder or easier to trigger. Attention is finite. We shouldn't just talk about willpower. We must talk about environmental design. It is easier to move the cookies than to use the anterior cingulate cortex to inhibit the urge to eat them 100 times a day. Once again, we can leverage the agency dopamine loop theory to work off of momentum. All right, that's all we had so far for automatic behaviors. And I asked, or I said, oh, we got free pizza? What's going on here? Craving. I'm a libertarian kind of guy when it comes to pizza. Don't care about pineapple on pizza. They call me the great pizza president, the pizza liberator. El Libertador de la Pizza. Libertarian free pizza? Free pizza for all. I was already voting on you, but now damn. All right, well, this might be controversial. I actually haven't had this type of pizza in a long time, but I would recommend pineapple and jalapeno on a pizza. I know that sounds crazy, but it kind of hits. Honestly, I would have taught the flat earthers getting more flack than pineapples. All right. Okay, I attempted to organize everything we discussed into an outline. What do you think? Then, before discussing some of the more granular notes / questions I have, let's confront the elephants in the room. The systematic biases and personal context subsections seem too large, and I'll explain why. Regardless of the notes we have for systematic biases, I was hoping that we would thoroughly cover as many relevant biases that would help us identify them as they arise, allowing us to look out for them and or intervene via the strategies we discuss in the strategies of intervention subsection. My concern is that I can't come up with an easy way to break this section apart in a way that makes sense. Perhaps this can just be a long subsection, and I try to be as succinct as possible. Regardless, the notes we have for personal context, I was hoping to go in depth about habits, addiction, habits of thought, etc. Now, perhaps I can fit everything in here, provided I don't go too in the weeds for each of these topics. And this might be fine, given that we will cover these topics later in the document for more practical directions. For example, breaking habits and addiction within the strategies of intervention subsection, effects of different concrete cultural contexts within a section called Our Personal Contexts later on in this major section. I just need to look out for other topics that might need to be included within this subsection. All right. This is an outline that effectively captures the one layer up abstraction we've been targeting by grounding the autopilot in the biological mechanisms of part 2 and the conceptual foundations of part 1. We've created a bridge from the physical brain to the acting agent. The elephants in the room, the size of these subsections are actually indicative of where the agent lives. These are the areas where universal human nature meets individual history, and they deserve the weight you've given them. Okay. I don't eat it anymore, but man, jalapenos and gorgonzola. Oh, what are gorgonzola? Cheese. Oh my gosh. I don't know if I've ever had this on pizza, but I want to try it now. Is this a type of cheese that comes in a certain type of pizza? Like, and do I have to get this from like Italy, or is this something that you can get anywhere, provided they're nice with it? All right, the mechanisms of the autopilot. This subsection establishes how any behavior becomes automatic, bridging biological energy with functional loops. Automation is a functional necessity to avoid combinatorial explosion. Okay. Is this just saying everything back at me? Addressing your concerns. For systematic biases, grouping them into functional clusters, as I have done above, helps maintain flow while being comprehensive. Oh, what did it do? Systematic biases. It just put them... It barely did a thing, right? I don't know. Okay. How do you feel about this direction and comprehensiveness? Is there anything that I'm doing wrong? Is there anything that I'm missing? Not from any notes that I've already shown you, but actually, but stuff I might not, but stuff I have not included or might not even be aware of which I might not even be aware. What other questions? Does anyone have a question that we should ask in this thing? Or is this an association issue? It's not about pineapples, but how people love their pizza and do not like infringes to their established taste buds and mental boundaries that is being assailed. I think it's usually a social issue. I think it's really just people don't want to say the thing that other people will give them flack for, so then they just don't say it, and that might have implication on what they actually do. They might not eat, or they might never choose to get pineapple on their pizza because they know it's weird according to other people, and so they might not even know if it's good or not because they're never going to try it because it's already a social faux pas. That's a good question. I think you call it blue cheese in the US. Oh, I see. Oh, I gotta try that out then. That's pretty easy to do. I guess whenever we have blue cheese, like it's always like a dip. Like I feel like we never just get blue cheese straight up. But maybe that's just me. Maybe I'm just not going to the store looking for blue cheese. Maybe I should. Is there anything that I'm doing wrong? Is there anything that I'm missing? Is there anything else in this like category of automatic behaviors that we have to cover? And then we might need more time on this topic. We might want to talk about. We might want like literally want to go into each of these like subtopics as a day or so. We just don't have enough time. We don't have enough time in the month. So I have to do this. This is really important. Patterns of thought. We have to do that. That's really important. We don't have to do the monetization plan all day, so maybe I could do monetization plan. But this should be something else. Maybe this is the mechanics of autopilot. And then we got to have some fun. Cognitive biases. Oh, let's do the full taxonomy. All right, so that's jumping ahead to... I think that's going to cover both systematic biases and this innate survival and social heuristics. So I think that's fine. I think we're good then. We should spend 2 days on cognitive biases. I need to ask this question about the triune brain. I think that's important. Short form marketing. Right. I want to start maybe posting shorts soon. Taking recommendations on Fridays. Yep. And then, I've got set up document roast. I think we're going to start working in document roast to each month, where we start going through the document and just roasting it and changing it. And yeah, so starting with the prologue here, but we should go one at a time. I don't think we should fully just stop working on part one. And we might as well just keep that up on the side here. Is muscle memory in there already? Yes, muscle memory is in there already. That is the only thing that's been like, I should actually mark it where it's, yeah, where do we say this stuff? We definitely say skills, stuff like this, but I don't know why this is like overlearned skills. Maybe we should just say like skills. Yeah, skills and muscle memory. So that's obviously we want to talk about as something intuitive that we think about, but then we need to cover it. So this would be, yeah, the tricky thing is like we will actually talk about skills in a different part of this document. So skills is actually less important for our like practical, like this is like the underlying like practical levers of like noticing the automatic behaviors. For things like building habits or building skills, we talk about that later on when we're actually in the pursuing goals effectively. This is where it's like, okay, in order to pursue to reach this goal, you need to build habits and routine, and you need to learn and acquire skills, and that's when we're going to really go into like muscle memory and learning in general, studying and stuff like that. Roasted. What is this picture? Jabasted. I don't even know what that is. But yeah, I think it's worth mentioning muscle memory is obviously a certainly an automatic behavior that we intuitively think about, and then also in the mechanisms of the autopilot, which we need a better name. That's a pretty bad name. We do want to say like, how do we learn these types of skills? Like what is actually happening, and so we can incorporate that into this subsection. And what would we want to do? We would want to put that like maybe here. How we incorporate, how we build motor skills, how we internalize information. So those two need to be roughly, or I guess the mechanisms behind both of those need to be talked about in this subsection. But it's also it's important to keep that in mind, because when you do anything, you are constantly building habits that you might not want to build. So that involves thinking and motor movements. So I don't know if there's, what motor movements would you not want to build? I feel like usually motor movements are always good. Like the thing that's bad is not building any like not moving at all. Any inclusion of subconscious actions like nail biting and other forms of stress. There it is. You just gave it. Um, that's what we want to think about here. So when would that be? That would be like that would be within this habits discussion we're talking about. So yeah, in habitual loops. So we can talk about. We can discuss negative, common negative habits. For example, nail biting and other forms of stress, anxiety related actions. Wonderful. Thank you very much. All right, let's let this rip. Have you considered if a document is the best presentation? Not that I have something I think is better in mind, but just versus the idea of a wiki, for example, or multiple documents or something. Oh, that's actually, yeah, that's a good point. At first, I thought you were asking like, is text the best way to present? And I think certainly not. I think that we want to package this stuff into more accessible media, such as videos or podcasts, or literally just me talking or whatever it is, short form. But yeah, whether or not a document is the best textual or text-based repository of this type of information. The only thing I don't like about the wiki is there's no sense of scale or scope. Like the document's nice where it's like, okay, we know there's 3 parts. Each part has like a number of pages, and that's it. And so you know where you are in the entire trajectory. But a wiki is. We should make a wiki, by the way. That actually would be sick. But I think we want the document still as something that people can like feel as though they can read through. Like what's really what I really didn't like about that. What was that site called? What was that site that we were reading through articles on? It was like a bunch of people who wanted to be rational, like just really rational. Some sort of thinking website. Is it on this thing? Do I have it here? No, I don't. Less wrong. That's what it was. Thank you, Arjun Helmet. Arjun Helmet, the resident stream historian. Less wrong. Like I don't like how less wrong. There's no sense of like where you are in. So I was specifically thinking about the less wrong. What was it? Less wrong. What are they called? Sequences. There we go. The sequences. Multiple posts. Rationality. Yeah, like it's a bunch of different posts that you read through as part of their like. Oh, is this new? Oh, no. Okay, 2020. Why does this look really different? So yeah, it was a bunch of pages like this. Maybe they changed the formatting. This looks a lot nicer than it used to. And I just didn't get a sense of like how far through I was with everything. So I do like having the large page or the large document type thing. But I do also like hyperlinks. Like I think that the document would benefit from being able to jump around. Which is kind of what I tried doing with some of the, obviously like whenever something's referenced, it's nice that you can quickly jump to the references. If you're like reading the TLDR, the main takeaways, it's really easy to find the full version. But yeah, perhaps a wiki would be nice. It would be cool if we could like literally just use some AI tool to take the document and just create a wiki out of it, and then we have that literally run once a month or something like that. Just like rewrites the wiki. Okay, out of curiosity, does your document discuss OCD? If it would, or if it does, it would be in the part 2 section on our personal contexts. Did we talk about OCD? Oh no, why is there so many OCDs? Okay, there's 0. So it would be somewhere in this whole deal. We could probably just search for ADHD and cognitive profile OCD. Does that count as neurodivergence? Yo, Kais3N. Kaizen, are you a psychologist? I'm not. I am a software engineer. But I happen to also enjoy this stuff, so... And I feel like this is something worth doing. But yeah, a lot of times this stream is like literally just learning. Like we're just constantly learning new stuff, which is cool. Yeah, that was probably my main concern for a document that goes incredibly in depth. It could be quite overwhelming for various reasons, like they already know the topic or agree with the idea already, understand where it's going, etc. True, true. Right. Maybe it would be nice to be able to jump back to the main takeaways really quickly so that you know when to just like get to the next section. I do like that we have the table of contents on the left so that like if you were done with the topic, you could just move to the next. You could just say, all right, I want to go next. So we will see what works and what doesn't work. It'll also be nice to just get more sentiment when more people join. Just get a lot more feedback, see what people are liking about it, see what people don't like about it. I like the organization of a document because then I could like really put it in my head like where things are physically in relation to where other information is. So it certainly helps me out. Hello, yes, am Harvard trained psychologist. How may I help? Yeah, I had this bit in college where I would just tell everyone that I was a psychology major. The hyperlink stuff looked really nice. Thank you. Senior psychology architect. Kaizen, are you a psychologist, sir? Okay. So what I say here... It avoids the laundry list trap of many self-help or psychology texts by grounding every behavioral loop in the adjudication marketplace, the ventromedial prefrontal cortex. And we're not going to be using like fancy names like this. I really don't like labeling something in a way that isn't just simply explaining what it is. You've created a unified theory for the section that makes it feel like a single cohesive argument rather than a collection of trivia. Regarding your question about what might be missing, topics outside your current notes that would bolster your comprehensive goal. There are 3 stealth mechanisms of automaticity that would fit perfectly into the current subsections. Stealth mechanisms. Okay, the gating mechanism of the thalamus. What it is. The thalamus acts as the switchboard of the brain. It decides which sensory signals are even allowed to reach the cortex for conscious processing. Right? The thalamus is huge in the global workspace theory. Like the thalamus was the relay that was connecting all those signals. So even though I would often use the metaphor that the global workspace was this centralized space that other local networks added their information to, what was really that center space was the thalamus. And really what's happening is it's not like there's a spotlight on the thalamus. It's the thalamus is giving those signals to everyone else. So once again, consciousness then becomes this aggregation of all these different local networks contributing not just to the global workspace, but like contributing to consciousness in whatever way they do. And that's what's still you know, tentative as to like what is actually happening in each of these local networks that's adding that sliver of your experience. It doesn't matter if it's the brain's specific substrate or not. But that's as much as we can go into consciousness for today. That's my consciousness quota. Where it fits, subsection 1, mechanisms, why included, explains the most fundamental level of automaticity, sensory gating. You are blind to the feeling of your socks on your feet right now because the thalamus has automatically gated that signal out to save processing power. This is the biological bedrock of pre-attentive processing. Okay, so we have that pre-attentive processing. We mentioned it earlier, like we know that this is just an intuitive thing. But now we could talk about that in relation to our conscious experience. So discussion of the thalamus as gating conscious experience. For example, you're blind. This is okay. This is a side tangent. This is one of my hot takes. And this is coming from a software engineer, obviously. But I think when there is a quote that isn't an entire sentence, then the quote should be inside the period. Because the period is acting as an end to this sentence, and the quote is just boxing in this phrase. I don't know why we would need to include that period here. Now, of course, if this was like a whole sentence, then I would say that the period actually makes sense as within the quote. Like what was quoted, what was said was a sentence, and therefore the period goes inside. But that's not the case here. That's my hot take of the day. Pretty controversial, I know. Okay, I find it interesting that you support school choice when, to my understanding, the majority of left-leaning people are skeptical of school choice. Well, I should say that I'm lucky enough that my family is, probably above the median level of privilege in the country. So, regardless of what I found to be good for me, I don't think that type of luxury is available for everyone else, and I don't think that type of decision is similar for everyone else. So, yeah, I also don't know the arguments towards, why people would not support school choice. So, I can't really talk about those views. Also, I wouldn't assume that I believe in everything that left people believe in. I don't think I do. I think there's a lot of things that I think you might be surprised I am rather agnostic on, or am not noticeably left on. All right. The endowment effect and sunk cost fallacy. Absolutely. Everyone loves the sunk cost fallacy. Where would these be, though? This is kind of a probability risk bias, but it's also a decision-making bias. I feel like those two are, these are all the same type of biases, but I could be overlooking something. So let's just write them down. Sunk cost fallacy. We could put these together. Endowment effect and sunk cost fallacy. Got to include those. Tendency to overvalue things simply because you own them. Endowment and the drive to continue an endeavor once an investment in money, effort, or time has been made, sunk cost. So once again, endowment also includes things that you've worked on. That goes full circle to what we talked about earlier in the stream. People who like work on something find it to be more valuable than if they had not worked on it. All right, these are primary biases that cause rigidity in our goals. They explain why we automatically defend a bad career choice or a failing relationship. The brain views letting go as a massive loss and an admission of error. Where do we say okay, we could just do that here. Maybe this should be included down here. All right, neurovisceral integration, the vagus nerve, the bidirectional highway between the gut, heart, and the brain, right? You mentioned the somatic marker hypothesis, but adding the physical hardware of the vagus nerve explains how the body sends that gut feeling to the ventromedial cortex to influence the adjudication. It makes the embodied cognition point much more concrete. Okay, fair enough. We could just put this where we already have the somatic marker hypothesis. Refined structural strategy. You're concerned about the personal context and systematic biases section being too large is valid. To keep in balance, I suggest this distribution strategy. Systemic biases, treat them as universal software bugs, and then personal context, treat them as unique user data. That's what we already had, so. Okay, the force multipliers, what you're doing right. The ADDS theory, including the agency dopamine loop, is a masterstroke. Yeah, thank you. I think I got it from Gemini previously, so Gemini is tooting its own horn here. It turns agency from a philosophical concept into a neurochemical tool. It tells the reader acting like an agent makes it biologically easier to be an agent. All right, the interpreter module. Yep, this is good stuff. Grounding everything in the post hoc storyteller prevents the reader from trusting their own excuses. It forces a level of epistemological humility that is rare in this type of literature. And we need to talk about the interpreter module in part 1. Like, that's really where this should be introduced. All right. Final quality check. You aren't doing anything wrong. The most common mistake in the project this ambitious is a failure to define the adjudication process, but you've centered it. Okay. I'm gonna delete this. I'm saying goodbye. And then we will jump into each of these subsections separately and learn all the stuff that needs to be learned for each of them. At least all the stuff that needs to be conveyed. But yeah, what are we at? We're at 1:38, so that's enough time for maybe a little more of this video that we were watching yesterday.
Would just say
so let's give it a go. What was the issue? How to respond? Yeah, no, we want to just get how to get in the head of the philosopher and then end it off. And then maybe I end the stream after that. Maybe, yeah, we end early for once.
Still, because time has stopped. You know, it takes time for everything else to sort of fall to the ground. Like, we're relying on the assumption that gravity is going to pull it to the ground. So all of these examples, like the holding up the phone and the pushing of the stick, either just don't work or are actually just kind of like helpful analogies for what is a much more subtle and specific phenomenon.
And one of the interesting things about the time that Aquinas was writing is that at that point, people had multiple notions of time. So I've been reading on my Substack. Nobody else is joining me for this one. This isn't the reading group because I'm not going to subject everyone to 700 pages of Charles Taylor just yet. But I'm reading Charles Taylor's A Secular Age there. And one of the things he points out is that for the medieval peasant, and indeed the medieval learned scholar, for a long time, certainly during Aquinas' period, time wasn't just our time, like linear time, what they actually called secular time. It also had time, like eternal time, so God's time, which just operated by like totally different rules. And I think, you know, had this kind of vertical, hierarchical, metaphysically dependent property to it. It also had a phenomenological dimension, right? So one of the things that that allows you to do is make times that are very distant in linear time closer together. So, Good Friday one year is, it feels to the medieval peasant closer to Good Friday last year than it does to the day after Good Friday. I don't know what the Saturday's called this year, or at least very least the Friday the following week, let's say, to avoid any kind of obvious liturgical difficulties. And there's this whole kind of other dimension that seems to be operant in the foreground or in the background of Aquinas' thinking here.
It's a pretty literal way to answer the question. A cranial drill would work, though. That you are right about that one. Absolutely.
That we don't necessarily think in terms of. I think there's a really interesting thing to be had here about how to try and get in the head of other people's views. I've been doing, to bring us back to consciousness a little bit, I've been exploring illusionism, which is a view that you kind of touched briefly upon earlier. And if you read illusionists, a lot of this, they will say things like, I'm not denying consciousness, I'm denying phenomenal consciousness. And I'm so used to equating consciousness and phenomenal consciousness that I kind of can't get a grip on what they mean. Like, I can lay it out propositionally, but I can't yet get inside the illusionist's head to see the world from their perspective, ironically, to have to experience what it's like to be an illusionist. And that that's not a criticism of illusionism. But I find it very interesting, especially exploring these historical thinkers.
So when you become convinced, you could say, like, I finally don't see what you're saying.
Yeah, exactly. That's what I'm going to say that this is not phenomenal at all. Actually, it's quite mundane. But yeah, this idea of like the extra intellectual difficulty that it takes to inhabit a particular alternative philosophy. Like, maybe in order to kind of grok. Oh, God, grok's like an AI now. Like, grok is a term from Stranger in a Strange Land that means to, like, understand something on a very deep level. And now it's just like the Twitter AI. And that sucks. But anyway, to kind of truly intuitively understand Aquinas' argument, maybe we need to, like, try and tease out his idea of eternal time. I mean, I don't believe in eternal time, so it doesn't make the argument any more convincing. But I think it's an interesting exercise to try and figure out how these thinkers would have perceived their own arguments. Like, Hume is another good example there, because so often people leap from Hume doesn't believe in actual causation to Hume doesn't believe in regularity, and everything could fall apart at any moment. It's like, well, that's not quite what he means. At least that's not quite what he means with his theory of causation. And I think that is a skill that I think we could train to understand historical philosophers, but also train to understand people around us today with radically different philosophical viewpoints. And illusionism has been my example of that.
It seems clear to me that Aquinas will have answers to the things that we're saying, right? I mean, like, the thing about someone like Aquinas is he's so thorough and so detailed, and it's one of those texts which is, I mean, something like the Summa Theologica or the Summa Contra Gentiles, or however you say it. These are long books, but they seem to be long in a justified sense. There are a lot of long books.
Yeah, it is crazy that, like, philosophers can write for so long and it still, like, makes sense or provides something new. All right, a shared illusion would be the best way to go about it, though. The first Indiana Jones movie, as an example, would be that Indy wasn't crucial to the movie. The movie would turn out to be the same if Indy wasn't there to troll them. This is crazy. This is the second time this week that someone has said an Indiana Jones reference, and I haven't watched the movie. The movie would turn out to be the same if Indy wasn't there to troll them. Nazis would find the Ark and still have died in the end. That's pretty interesting. I always like those types of movie observations. Like, it's not like a plot hole, but it's just like an interesting thing to notice about a movie. I wonder if that showed up in, like, r/shitty movie details. That's a pretty funny subreddit. I think Onion is doing Indiana Jones marathon on Discord this weekend. For real? Man, this is the one weekend I'm not going to be around. I'll tune in from remote. Simple because how Indiana Jones is such an audience fave. Oh, simply because of how Indiana Jones is such an audience fave. Huge cultural thing. Right. Yeah, it's hard to get into these types of philosophers' minds. Also because I think they do find themselves digging themselves into their own metaphysical holes And that doesn't mean that they don't have anything to offer. Obviously, if you were to go down in there with them, you would, learn some cool stuff. Like, that was my experience with Heidegger. It's just sometimes it's so taxing to do that. It's like it's a whole ordeal to have to learn these things just so that you can see what they were trying to say, or try to consider with some reasonable certainty what they're trying to say. So then that begs the question of, like, how do we make sure that we don't dig ourselves a hole that is just like some idiosyncratic philosophy? And the way I've gone about that is to ground our stuff in science, so that at least we can rely on that. And also to make all of the philosophical stuff we do as accessible as possible. So like that the goal was always how to capture as much of the essence of all this like really difficult philosophy in the most accessible, intuitive way for the most amount of people. And that was what I attempted in part 1, and I think we need to make it better. I will send it to you via satellite waves, no worries. A little bit of Starlink.
Books where you feel like that could have been a lot shorter, and maybe Aquinas could have shaved off a few words here and there, but like he really does sort of go into everything. And so I'm not trying to suggest that he wouldn't have an answer, and I'm saying that it's something that I need to work out. And quite right, in order to see where someone's coming from, you really do need to inhabit their world, because the way that they're using the words, it's like what Alistair McIntyre talks about in After Virtue about our use of ethical terms. It's like maybe we mean so many different things by the words that we're using that you just need to get inside of the heads of these people, and it's something that I would like to do at some point, but I don't know if I have it in me, because it's a lot, and it's difficult to know where to place your attention. But it seems to me that Aquinas is celebrated for a reason.
The difficulty I have is that certainly these philosophers have something of value, right? Like, I think and when I say that, I don't mean like they have something objectively of value. I think it's rather like, I know that if I were to actually put in that effort, I would find something useful out of it. I would say like, I learned this stuff. Now, what's not obvious is whether or not I would come out at the other end and say like, you know what, I think that was worth it. And that's a harder thing to speculate on. Now, the thing you got to realize with these philosophers is, at the end of the day, they are just speculating. They're just conceptualizing what their own intuition about the world, and they're leveraging what came before them. So they're leveraging philosophies that influence them, and they're coming up with this new conceptualization. So yeah, you might get something out of it. The question is, are you going to get something out of that we don't have today? Like, we've got contemporary philosophers, or we got a lot of people that are taking these other philosophers, and they're communicating what they said in ways that are really elegant and nice and accessible. So the question is, like, what might have been missed? Like, what information might you now be able to get from that you didn't get from other people that have either incorporated it into their own philosophy or have now communicated or taught that information? And so that's a tricky thing to manage. And then the big elephant in the room that I keep trying to talk about is that none of these philosophers had science to really ground what they're saying. They're just relying on the intuition of phenomenology, which is really awesome and powerful. But without the science to back it up, or to go with it, then you're at a difficult point where we have to consider. Okay, so the other thing that I should mention is, with our full view of science and obviously some of these philosophies that are more contemporary, like the linguistic philosophies, we could see how people can explain things in different ways, and there's a lot of utility in the way that people explain it, but it doesn't mean that an explanation is like right in some objective, absolute way. So then the real difficulty is, like, when thinking about these philosophers, like, really what at the end of the day, it's are they conveying some intuitive information with the words that they're using or the way that they're explaining things? And then the other question is, if they're really in the weeds, then is it even worth reading if it's not accessible enough? Because, you know, what we're looking for is accessible ways to explain these things. Now, granted, you know, with stuff like with Heidegger, I think I was actually able to dive in and then to still pull out the essence of what he's trying to say in an accessible language. So I probably could do that with someone else. But really what I'm looking for at the end of the day is ways in which I can explain things. So I would be looking for philosophers who come up with really effective ways to explain phenomenal observations or metaphysical behaviors of how meaning manifests in our minds and stuff like that. But yeah, it's tricky. Right now, I'm much more interested in reading about neuroscience and psychology and just figuring out what that whole group is saying, because I think that's actually much more useful for us for a lot of these topics. Now, once we get to part 3 and we start getting into like meaning of life stuff, then we're going to have to figure out, okay, who really has the information here? Now, I will start with the people that are coming up with like surefire ways to give you positive well-being in your life. Like there are scientists who know what you can do to increase the chances that you will experience well-being. So I think I will still prioritize that over like the philosophers that are like the existential philosophers that are you know, intuitive or like speculating on what intuitively leads to a happy life. But, you know, I think it's still worth doing that. I still think it's worth going and looking at what those philosophers are saying. Okay. What is going on here? We've got a... All right, with his perspectivism, Nietzsche claims no one can ever escape their own perspective. It's thus absurd to think of objectivity as disinterested contemplation. Knowledge comes not from denying our subjective viewpoints, but in evaluating the differences between them. Beautiful. Awesome. Really nicely said. I like it. 2 thumbs up. Okay, please explain. I don't understand. Is this the person that posted? Philosophy break? It's as much a problem of physics and geometry as it is rhetoric and competing interests. On the base level, your perspective is trapped inside your skull, looking out your senses into the world. The similarities of life are astonishingly similar. We all have 2 eyes, give or take, and 2 ears, usually mouth in the same place, more or less, all that, blah, 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 blah. The edge cases where we are not the same, providing all the insights into ourselves. The interface between yourself and the world is not symmetrical to everyone else. It can't be, because obviously they're occupying the same space as you. All right, so this is going in a direction where like physically we're in different places and getting different perspectives. But you can make a more effective argument towards perspectivism following predictive processing. Even if we were in like the same physical space and we were, you know, experiencing the same things, if our brain has different models, memories, it would have different priors, predictive priors. It would literally see different things. Now, granted, it would also affect what you put your attention on. So you would end up getting, you know, the two bodies would eventually split like pretty quickly. But yeah, all this stuff is going to be valid afterwards. You can't leap into the skull of another and see out their eyes, know what they know as they know it, as if you yourself knew and believed they were you. You can't replicate their lifetime and experience. You can't know the reason why they are the way they are in its entirety without gross abstraction and wild assumption of unverified fact. By the way, no one knows the reason why they are the way that they are in its entirety. Obviously, that the whole point of the interpreter module is that we our consciousness needs to make sense of who we are and where we are and what is going on. So it does that for us. That's what we experience, but that's not like the reasons why we are the way that we are. And it would be the case that there isn't a concrete set of reasons why we are the way that we are, unless we were going to talk about the physical world, where we like actually look at the deterministic nature of the physical world, which, as we discussed yesterday, is actually quite complicated in the context of quantum mechanics, depending on which interpretation of quantum mechanics we follow. Okay. Ancient philosophy influenced the development of science. It had to come first, absolutely. That's the take we make in the document. They worked with what they got, absolutely. Men have more teeth than women, Aristotle. Nice. In a rich man's house, there is no place to spit but his face. Wow. And check this out. Diogenes. All right. Diogenes. It was on purpose, Diogenes. The comments sorted by best are interesting. Oh, by best. By best. What am I on? Oh, okay. Would dissociative identity disorder would agree? Would disagree? Multiple personalities that disagree with the same senses that come through the same inherited body, right? Splendid pronunciation. Thank you very much. That's the memory we're dealing with here. Took only 5 tries. Okay, so we are all trapped in our unique perspective, guessing at the lived experience of others at best, desperately trying to understand or change each other with inadequate tools to do so perfectly, not just epistemologically, not just in a unique experience, but physically, geometrically, and temporally. We are trapped in our own perspective. The more aware we are of the differences, the more aware of the honest contrast between perspectives we become. Right, so I think there is truth in here. To understand all this underlying neuroscience and biology that's affecting each of our unique subjective experiences, by like having an appreciation for that, I think that allows us to practice empathy more effectively. We can empathize with others because we know that they have their own set of whatever's contributing to their predisposition. And that could also affect how we feel about the very truth of the things that we think are true. So understanding that the way that my perspective on the world is subjective fundamentally. I'm not the arbiter of the truth, but my attempt at understanding it. There's an exchange of responsibility to verify and also express our unique attempts. The two responsibilities is where true meaning arises. Not from assumptions we know, but attempting to know better. So this is, I mean, this is more of a normative, prescriptive claim that, you know, it sounds cool. But it's not like, that's not where true meaning arises in some absolute sense either. Rhetoric is also important in this perspective. Whoa. Anaxagoras and Democritus being important reading to supplement what Nietzsche is critical of and in support of simultaneously in opposition to the innate and eternal disembodied intelligence. These philosophers were very much consider intelligence a material phenomenon subject to proof and verification instead of spooky action at a distance. Intuition and divine inspiration coming from faith alone. All right, I don't know how I feel about that last part, but all right. I would agree, but it also seems to be an inaccurate, if not strawman use of the word objectivity, at least in English. Objectivity involves using one's sense perceptions to make judgments about the external world, not just contemplation. Right? This person does not understand that our perception of whatever's out there, right? Whatever's outside our skull is not, how do I say this? The stimuli does not have authority over the, how do I want to say this? I should just say that we start with our model, and then the stimuli constrains and directs where that model goes. It doesn't go the other way around. It's not like we just merely filter sensory stimuli. And so it would be inappropriate to say that the external world is like objective in that sense. The most sophisticated form of objectivity would have to be wrapped up in the standards of science that allows us to say that something empirical is reliable. But obviously that's not what people usually think of when they think of objectivity, so all right, we gotta finish this. We got 5 minutes. The pronunciation has glutamated and reached full glutamation. Hell yeah. Some would argue that the human body and its senses are filters for the world they interact with. Right, I would say that would be somewhat inappropriate, only because it's ambiguous enough that people are going to think that we are just merely taking in stimuli, and that stimuli is like has some ontological priority, and then our memory is just like kind of telling us things about what we're seeing. There's simply too much info for even the mind to process. Prioritizing which perceived info directly impacts the individual before considering the whole other lot that is coming in. Yep. This is all happening. A lot of this is happening unconsciously. And yeah, I think the best way I could say this, and I'm just like repeating myself, is just, we start with a model, and then sensory stimuli or interoceptive stimuli, stuff coming from the body. All these senses are just kind of moving our model, so that it's just like morphing our model. So they're constraints that are affecting the trajectory of how this model morphs. But it's not that, like, we're really not working with the outside world and like seeing the outside world. That's kind of what Lisa Feldman Barrett talks about. Like, we are, like, conscious experience is just like, imagine the world as a black box. Not that we are the black box. Like, imagine the world's the black box. We just get information from that, but we're like, everything that we're experiencing is happening within our outline here. And we can only make guesses about what the stuff outside of our body even is. And we have the mechanisms to do so. But yeah, all the information that comes, like when I see this and I see it's a pen, all that information is an effect of what's already inside my head. It's, there's photons here, but the photons aren't literally... The photons don't include the words pen. It doesn't include the information of this thing can write. Like, that's all inside my head. Pen mention. Hell yeah, we should have a counter. We should get a pen counter. I should get one of those, what are they called? Computer vision models to just look for pens, so that when I put a pen up, it outlines it. I wonder if that is how abstract thinking comes about. Oh, in the sense that I could think about the pen when it's not even in my mind? I think that is how abstract thinking comes about. What's happening when I think about a pen is that parts of my brain that are associated with previous experiences I've had with a pen are reactivated. So that includes visual experience. So that's why when you like close your eyes and think about a beach, you can see a beach for, however fleeting that is. And it's not that you see it with as much crystal clarity as if you were actually at the beach and the photons are constantly constraining the way that your model is affecting your experience, but it allows you to still see the beach in some rudimentary way. Same with smelling. So that's how you can, like, if I said a certain smell, or you thought about a certain smell, you might actually be able to smell it for that split second. It's because our brain can literally simulate these experiences without the bottom-up sensory stimuli to even hit us. That's one of the really cool things we learned from predictive processing.
Fantastic. Well, and just to kind of wrap this up, what do you think, on your estimation, is the best idea that you encountered in the last year?
Gosh, man, the best idea that I've encountered in the last year. I mean, okay.
Pineapple and.
Okay, so I want to say, like, split brain stuff.
I had this video open for like a week and then I just closed it. I mean, that's the same with me. I think we just had it like tabbed, and then we did kind of skip a lot of it. But I am curious what he's going to say here.
I've actually been thinking about split brain stuff for longer than a year, but in the past year,
split brain
I've really begun to try to consider the implications of.
That's kind of what we just mentioned, right?
The hemispheric, like, lateral divide of the brain for senses of self, for personhood, for consciousness, for that kind of stuff. I can't exactly give you an idea there. Like, I'm working my way through McGilchrist's The Matter with Things and his sort of magnum opus 2-volume, 3-part philosophy. And he sort of says, like, look, I can't really tell you what I think. I kind of just have to take you with me. We're just going to sort of walk through some stuff. We're going to stop here and there to look from some vantage points, and hopefully by the end you'll kind of get what I'm driving at. I think he's driving at something really important. So the significance of the hemispheric divide, which has got, I mean, if most people agree that our brains are like the center of our conscious experiences, whether the brain produces consciousness or not, you know, the brain is like where it all happens. The brain is where sort of we, if we are anyway, where it seems to sit. And the fact that there are like 2 of them, like consistently, that every single nervous study we've ever studied has an asymmetrical divide. Even like nematodes with like 308 neurons have an asymmetry in them. There seems to be some deep evolutionary reason to keep them separate, to the extent that when the brain grows, the corpus callosum doesn't grow. So the corpus callosum actually, relatively speaking, shrinks as the brain evolves. Like, it seems like there's a really good reason to keep them apart. Mammals are the only creatures that have corpus callosums. Other animals just don't even have that connective tissue. That's got to mean something. And the fact that the brain is like the center of like everything we ever experience ever, the center of thought, of experience, of love, of passion, of art, of music, the fact that there are 2 of them that seem to be in like this kind of symbiotic relationship where sometimes they rub up against each other.
It would be
sometimes
interesting
they work
to like
That's
look
gotta
up
be like
what the
so
most contemporary
right? The fact that like our very center of experience is like dualistic, is like
this is
there's
the
like
case.
this duality of the way that we attend to the world. That's got to mean something. And the reason I want to work through the rest of The Matter with Things is because I want to try and unlock what that significance is. So there's that. Outside of that, I think Kastrup's attack on materialism was quite important to me. The view that like phenomenological stuff comes first. Like, I've got a book. This is Waking Up by Sam Harris, because I just had him back on my show. And like, I have an experience of it. I see it, I touch it, I hear it, right? It's all experiential states. And I've got an AirPods case here, and I can like be like, oh, this one feels like it's kind of more, it's harder to move than this one. And, you know, this one appears to me, it takes up more of my visual field than this one does. And these are all experiences, but then we start mathematizing them. We start putting labels on these experiences. So I call it weight. And I give it the mathematical language of like kilograms. You know, I measure the phenomenological experience in kilograms. So kilograms is a quantification of the quality of how I'm experiencing the world. And yeah, like this one, like it's got sort of this thing which I'm going to call length. I'm going to call it centimeters. And so we start with the experience and then we put mathematical labels on them. And then for some reason, what we've done is we've like said, actually, at some point we just suddenly flipped and we're like, no, the thing that really exists, the thing that's foundational, is the label, is the math, is the kilograms, the centimeters, all of that kind of stuff. That's the stuff that really exists. And my experience of it is somehow like emergent of it. Like, what? I mean, if you actually track the likely historical story, the mathematical description of the world is emergent of the experience that you're having, you know? And so Kastrup thinks that we sort of flipped it on its head, and I think that's a really interesting idea. Like, he says that we're drawing a map of a mountain range, and like clearly we're just trying to like describe the mountain range in a useful way, and then at some point we've just suddenly decided that actually the thing that really exists is the map, and the mountain range must somehow emerge out of the map. And you're saying that while you're stood on top of a mountain. It just, I don't know, I think there's something in there. I mean, we didn't get into that. We said we might talk about that, but I mean, I think that's interesting. Not to say it's foolproof or anything, but I can't remember
No,
the
I
exact
said he
nature of your
just
question,
had
but
Sam
whether
on.
it's most interesting or important or whatever. But that's
and I guess this was a while ago, so we might have already
just try to
seen
really
that.
get to grips with what it
Oh,
means
actually,
to
no,
be
maybe
experiencing the world phenomenologically first.
Post that soon.
Those are two things that come to mind, I think.
Fantastic. Well, thanks so much. And you're a guest on my show today. Later this year, I'm going to be a guest on your tour, which would be really, really nice.
Yeah, come along, people. We're going to be in Manchester together on stage. It's going to be good fun. I can't remember which date. It is the 2nd of March. 2nd of March at the Aviva Studios in Manchester. Soon. So if you are anywhere near 0161, get down. It's going to be fun. It's the only show you're joining me for. I'm going on tour.
Yes, yeah.
And it's the first time we've ever been on stage together in like a ticketed event, just the two of us anyway. We've spoken at the same events and stuff, but it's the first time we've ever done this. And if it goes horribly, it might be the last time. So make the most of it. Grab your tickets.
Yes,
I think it's going to be great fun.
The one and only chance to see us meet.
All right, I think that's a wrap. Got some good stuff done. We got some productive stuff done, and then we had some fun. Did we learn anything? I think so. Okay, what's going on here? I might not believe we need the word imagine, because it seems to me like remember is what it actually is. Is that controversial? Oh, I was probably describing how memory works. It's tricky because when people think of memory, or like when people think of remember, they think that they remember the actual fact, or they remember how things actually were. But when we remember, because it's actually just reactivating parts of our brain that were this is effectively we got conditioned, and now we're reactivating parts of our brain. It's not exactly the same as the original memory. So it's remembering, but it's also different. So remember might be too ambiguous. It might imply that complete memory, whereas really what's happening is some sort of reactivation. And I think there's a better word for that. I forget what it is. Something. But yeah, that's why imagination's kind of nice, because it really I guess the predictive processing people call it controlled hallucination. So the hallucination aspect of it is the imagination, but the controlled part of that is the fact that sensory data or bottom-up data is still affecting what we're imagining. So it's not like, I'm hallucinating in the sense that there's not a physical pen in front of me, if we're talking about the physical world. Like I think we can get to this point where we understand that there is a set of matter that is in front of me that's causing me to experience this as a pen. But it's a controlled hallucination in the sense that all this information, this phenomenal experience of there being a pen here, is really a product of all what's going on in my brain, and it's something that I'm experiencing through consciousness. It's not the physical space here. I'm not actually experiencing the physical world directly in that regard. So we've got bottom-up sensory data that is constraining or controlling the hallucination that I'm having, which would be an imagination of some sort. Imagination versus visualization differences. I would say that visualization is heavy on weighting the visual aspect, but imagination is more of a holistic phenomenology or a phenomenal experience. But maybe I'm wrong. Like I'm really going off of like intuition. Like my intuition of those words, what I hear or what I think of when I hear them, I think imagination is closer because it kind of captures more of our experience. But even imagination might not be like hallucination. Also, people think of it as like you're seeing some visual thing, but really it's your entire experience is affected by this. How you feel, like whether or not I'm happy about this pen, is affected by these past memories that I had, or these past experiences that conditioned that feeling. This is why seeing, your favorite food is being served or something like that is like makes you happy, because you've been conditioned to have that sort of happiness experience. And I think the current document doesn't go as deep into I don't know if it needs to. But we've talked about the neuroplasticity behind that type of thing, how how like when you receive something that you deem to be good or better than expected, you get a hit of dopamine, but that dopamine's not actually like making you feel good. What that dopamine's doing is actually affecting the growth of the connections in your brain, such that in the future, when you get that same stimuli, it'll affect the activation of those connections. Now, you know, these big hits of dopamine often come with some other feeling of different chemicals that make you feel really good. And then obviously dopamine always kind of pushes you in a direction, and dopamine in itself kind of feels good, but you know, it's kind of a trick as to it feeling good. You know, it's making everything about your body be drawn towards this thing, so it gives you this idea that it makes you feel good, even though it's not like one of the molecules that really makes you feel good. So all right. Yeah, never bring up pineapples and pizza in a convo. Imagination versus okay. Nice. Yeah, hopefully he releases that video with Sam soon. All right, thanks everyone for chilling. We will be back at it next week. Unfortunately, I'm out until Tuesday, but then we're back doing productive things. And yeah, let's make a good month. Make it a good weekend too.